So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spike Knight, and in these podcasts, I like talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I am continuing on with my Star Wars film reviews as I view Rogue One, a Star Wars story. But, just before I do that, I want to quickly say that I have hay fever right now, and it affects me quite badly. So if I'm sniffling throughout this podcast, I apologise. I also apologise that I sound bummed up right now, and I apologise if some of the points I make don't make complete sense. It's just because of the way I'm thinking, because of what hay fever is doing to me, because it's that time of the year. But other than that, this should be a great and fun podcast to listen to and or watch. So let's get into it, shall we? Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So, if you're one of the very, very, very few people that got to the end of my last Star Wars review, which was my review of Revenge of the Sith, you may be sitting there going, why? Why, Spike? Why are you reviewing Rogue One now, when at the end of your Revenge of the Sith review, you said you were going to be reviewing A New Hope next? And it's a very good question, and my simple answer is, I was sitting down to watch A New Hope. I was getting my food and my drink ready, because I was watching it around lunchtime a couple of days ago, and then I thought, why don't I do a double header? Why don't I watch Rogue One and A New Hope back to back to see how well Rogue One aligns with A New Hope? And so that's exactly what I did, because I haven't done that since this film came out on DVD in 2017. So that's why I'm reviewing Rogue One today, and I will get around to reviewing A New Hope at some point on this channel, probably within the next couple of weeks to the next month on this channel. But for today, I'm reviewing Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So Rogue One, a Star Wars story was released in Christmas of 2016. And I remember going to watch this film at the cinema and not being terribly excited about seeing it. I mean, I was excited because it was a new Star Wars movie, and there was another Star Wars movie I got to watch in the cinema. It was the second Star Wars movie I got to watch in the cinema, because the first Star Wars movie I got to watch in the cinema was The Force Awakens, which came out a year before Rogue One. But that was the thing, because I'd seen The Force Awakens a year before, and because it ended on that cliffhanger of Rey giving Luke Skywalker's lightsaber back to him on the edge of a cliff, it was quite literally a cliffhanger. I was like, oh my god, where does that story go? And of course, I hadn't seen The Last Jedi at that point, so I was more excited about seeing the continuation of the story that The Force Awakens started than seeing a prequel to A New Hope, all about how the rebellion got the Death Star plans, about following characters that the chances are I was never going to see again, and a film which didn't really look like Star Wars to me. Like, the trailers for this film, the trailers for Rogue One, although they looked good, I was like, I'm not really getting Star Wars from this. And yeah, I was excited about seeing Darth Vader in another Star Wars movie, in a new Star Wars movie. But I was also like, he's not going to be much of the film, though, is he? That's what my thinking was. So I was excited about seeing the movie because it was another Star Wars movie I got to watch in the cinema. But I wasn't terribly excited about it the same way I was literally dying of excitement to watch The Force Awakens. But I remember going to watch Rogue One at the cinema, and it was at my local cinema. My local cinema literally just opened up. It opened up in November of 2016, and this movie came out in Christmas of 2016. So it wasn't long after my local cinema had opened up, and it was my first time going to my local cinema, which I go to regularly now. And I remember walking into my screening room, and it was packed full of Star Wars fans, and I felt cautiously optimistic. I was like, God, I want to enjoy this film so badly, but I was also really afraid that this would be the first Star Wars movie that I watched at the cinema and not like. Then, about 3 hours later, after we had the ads, the trailers, and the film itself, I sat there completely in awe of what I just experienced. It was unlike any Star Wars movie I'd seen up to that point. It was leaving this mark on me that I really didn't expect it to. It felt so refreshing, it felt so new, but it also felt so familiar at the same time. And I loved how dark it was. I loved how it showed the inner workings of the rebellion, the inner workings of the Empire. Something I never thought I was going to see in a Star Wars movie. And I was like, wow, what was that film? I couldn't get over it, to the point that the week after I watched the film for the first time in the cinema, I would be playing all the Star Wars games in my house. I remember playing a lot of Star Wars Battlefront 2, both versions of that game, the original Star Wars Battlefront 2, which is of course the best version of Star Wars Battlefront 2, and even the EA Star Wars Battlefront 2, which, sign on here, an unpopular opinion, but I don't care, it's my opinion. I actually enjoy the EA Star Wars Battlefront 2. I think it's okay. I don't think it's as good as the original, but I think it's a good game. And I remember playing both of those games so much, and other Star Wars games here and there, like I would go back and play LEGO Star Wars: A Complete Saga as well, after watching Rogue One, because I felt when I was playing the Star Wars Battlefront games, it was almost like I was playing through Rogue One. You know what I mean? And I couldn't stop listening to the score to this movie by Michael Giacchino after I'd seen it. I remember trying to find tracks on YouTube of the score and trying to memorize pieces of music that I could hum to myself when I was in a boring situation, because I didn't used to listen to music on my earphones when I was out and about back then. So I used to, whenever I was in a boring situation, like when I was in a car ride, I would sometimes just think of the music to Rogue One the week after I saw it, and I was absolutely in love with this movie. I couldn't get over what was I trying to say? I couldn't get over the effect it had on me. It almost possessed me. And then in January, I went to go and rewatch the film. January 2017, I went to go and rewatch the film at the cinema. But it wasn't at the same cinema that I first saw it. It was at another cinema that I still don't love today. I think the cinema is, I don't know, there's something about it that I don't get a nice feeling every time I go to the cinema. But anyway, it was January 2017, and I went to this different cinema to go and rewatch Rogue One. And I remember walking out the cinema feeling a little underwhelmed. Actually, scratch that. Feeling very underwhelmed. Maybe it was, I was thinking at the time, maybe it was just the hype of seeing a new Star Wars movie at the cinema the first time, and that's why I loved it so much. But rewatching it and seeing and knowing where everything was going, knowing when everything was coming, I was like, yeah, this film, it didn't work for me the same way it did the first time. And I felt that was going to be my opinion on Rogue One as time went on. But that was not the case, because then when the movie came out on DVD a good few months later, I remember rewatching it and thinking, what was I thinking the second time I saw this movie? This movie rocks! This movie is fantastic! I mean, maybe the second time I saw it was just because it was in January. Maybe because, I knew I was going back to school not too long after I went to this, after I went to my second screening of Rogue One. So maybe it's because I was watching it in January, and January is not a good month anyway. I don't even know why January exists, so perhaps that's why I didn't have the best experience watching the movie for the second time. But when I watched it for the third time, I was like, God, I love this film. And the more I rewatch this film, the more I absolutely love it. And when I rewatched it for the first time in about 3 years, a couple of days ago now, the thing which really struck me on about a 50th rewatch was how good this film, how well this film is written. Because you care about these characters in the movie. At least I do when I watch it. You care about the characters, even though you don't really know much about them. I mean, you know quite a bit about Jyn Erso, but she's the protagonist. The other main characters, Cassian Andor, you don't know, the other main characters that are around throughout the film, for instance, Cassian Andor, you don't really know much about him. I mean, now we know more about Cassian Andor because the Andor TV show, the first series of the Andor TV show, the second series is yet to come out, but the first series of the Andor TV show has released. So we know more about Cassian Andor's character, but back then we didn't. We knew that he was this rebellion soldier, he was closed off, he was a general in the rebellion actually, and he had this big gun and he wanted to take down the Empire so badly, and he had this droid with him. And that's all we knew about the character. That's all we needed to know about the character. We also meet another character in the film who is his ex-Empire pilot who has been witnessing how evil the Empire is being, and he wants to take the Empire down. And that's all we need to know about him, and we care about him. There's another character who's just got a big gun and he wants to shoot down, he wants to kill the Empire, he wants to shoot down as many stormtroopers as possible, and that's all we need to know about the character, and I cared about him. There's another character who has Force connections, and he keeps saying throughout the movie, I'm one with the Force and the Force is one with me, and that's all we need to know about that character, and yet I cared about him. And then get the droid K2SO, and I didn't really know much about K2SO. I knew that it was an Imperial droid, which on the surface was a bit of a head scratch. It was like, an Imperial droid? We haven't seen one of them in any of the original 3 Star Wars movies. But when I went to watch the film, I was like, oh, I don't care that we haven't seen this type of droid before in the Star Wars franchise. I love that he's here, and I love how cocky he is and how funny he is at the same time. And I love that droid because of how funny he is. You care about him. I couldn't believe how much I cared about the characters, and also I couldn't believe how well. And God, the sweat is getting into my eye right now. It's so warm today that I'm recording. It's so warm, today, the day that I'm recording this review. I also love how well this film, how well the dialogue in this film is written, because you get so many great lines. Like just before you get the Battle of Scarif, Cassian Andor says to the rebel troopers, let's make 10 men feel like 100. And then you get lines like when Saw Gerrera says, save the rebellion, save the dream. I can't do a Saw Gerrera impression whatsoever, clearly, but I love that line of dialogue. I also love all the lines of dialogue between Orson Krennic, the main antagonist of this film, and Grand Moff Tarkin, in particular when Orson Krennic says, we stand here amidst my achievement. And I love that line of dialogue so much. There's so many great lines of dialogue in this movie, which really gets me. And I love the characters. I don't care that we don't know much about them before this movie. I don't care that we don't get a full backstory for the side characters. I think if we did get a backstory for the side characters, the movie would be like 4 hours long, and I don't want it to be 4 hours long. I think this movie is a perfect length, and I don't care that I don't know much about the characters other than Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor, because I care about them and I enjoy watching them so much, and this film makes them so likeable, And another thing which really struck me when I was rewatching the film the other night was how visually stunning this movie is. The cinematography on this movie was done by Greg Fraser, who also did the cinematography on such movies as Dune Part 1 and 2, Lion. He did the cinematography on The Batman, and more recently he did the cinematography on another Gareth Edwards movie, because Gareth Edwards directed this film. He did the cinematography on The Creator, which actually shares a lot of visual similarities to this film, in my opinion. And I think Greg Fraser did an absolutely magnificent job with the cinematography of this movie, because I love the way this film looks. Visually, I think it's one of the most beautiful Star Wars movies. I mean, there's even one moment in the film where Orson Krennic is watching the Death Star the Death Star destruction for the first time, and he goes, "Oh, isn't it beautiful?" He says something like that, and I'm like, yeah, it is. I mean, Greg Fraser somehow with this movie made destruction look beautiful, and I love the way this film looks. I think it is one of the best shot Star Wars movies, period. And also, I love how you can't tell that this film was apparently made by 2 directors and had its final act completely reshot. Like, something I haven't mentioned yet, but I plan to mention up front with this review, but that's just the way things are today with my head being all over the place. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that Gareth Edwards is credited as the main director on this movie. Like, when the credits come up at the end of the film, bum ba dum 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 bum ba ba bum bum, and we get the credits at the end of this movie. It says directed by Gareth Edwards. However, in the past almost 8 years since this film released, it's basically been reported that Gareth Edwards didn't direct the entire movie, and that Tony Gilroy, who is credited as a co-writer on this film, and he did go on to showrun, who has gone on to showrun the Disney Plus Star Wars TV show Andor, which is a prequel to this movie, actually came in and reshot the entire final act of the film, and also other significant sections of the movie as well. And so actually this film should be credited. So actually the director, when the credits come up, that's what I'm trying to say, when the credits come up, it should say directed by Gareth Edwards and Tony Gilroy, because it does sound like Gareth Edwards still did direct the film though. I know a lot of people like to say now that he didn't, but when Gareth Edwards was doing press for his latest movie, The Creator, somebody asked him, how much were you involved in Rogue One during the reshoots? Because it's been publicly reported for a long time that Rogue One went through some substantial reshoots. And Gareth Edwards basically said something on the lines of, I was involved in the film to the very end, to the release date. And I think you can tell, because although I totally believe that Tony Gilroy came in and changed significant things about this movie. I mean, Gareth Edwards also directed the 2014 Godzilla movie, and apparently Tony Gilroy also made some significant changes to that as well. So I'm not surprised that he made some changes to this film, and I totally believe that he did, because he's still working with Lucasfilm today. Tony Gilroy is. Although I believe he made changes, I also think this still very much looks like a Gareth Edwards movie, and I still think it has some of that feeling of a Gareth Edwards film as well. Like if you watch The Creator, which I didn't really like, by the way, but if you watch The Creator, or if you watch 2014 Godzilla movie, and if you watch this one, they've all got a similar kind of feel. You know? At least I think they do, and they've also got similar kind of visuals, and I think that's because Gareth Edwards was still involved in this movie and did still direct a large chunk of it. I also totally believe that Tony Gilroy did as well. But at the same time, if somebody told you this film underwent significant reshoots for its big finale, you wouldn't believe them. Like, I remember hearing a couple of years ago about all this stuff to do with the reshoots, and that Tony Gilroy actually came in and changed a lot with Rogue One in the post-production, or in the later stages of production of this movie, should I say. And I remember hearing that and thinking, really? Wow. Because you can't tell that whatsoever. And I think that's such a big positive about this movie, a big win for this film, because there have been quite a lot of big budget movies. I mean, there's another big budget Star Wars, Disney Star Wars movie called Solo, which you can tell underwent significant reshoots, but you can't tell that with this movie, and I think that's kind of remarkable, because from what I've heard, this film was a complete mess at one point, and Tony Gilroy came in to fix it, and you can't tell that whatsoever. I mean, I didn't know that for the longest time. I genuinely thought for the longest time this was a Gareth Edwards movie, and then I was hearing about it as more time went on, as I watched more Star Wars pundits, more movie pundits online who love to talk about Star Wars, and I was like, wow, you really can't tell that. And I think it's a big plus with this movie that you cannot tell that it was apparently shot by two different directors. And I don't care what anybody says. I love the musical score to this movie. I mean, this musical score was criticised so much when it came out, it sounded like. And I understand why people don't love the musical score. And it's not my favourite Star Wars musical score. Any John Williams Star Wars musical score easily triumphs this one. But something I really love about the musical score is how it still sounds like Star Wars. It sounds like Michael Giacchino's take on Star Wars. And he only had 4 weeks to compose the entire musical score to this movie. And I was rewatching the film the other night and I was thinking, there's not really a moment where the musical score isn't there. There's not many quiet moments in the film. I'm not saying that as a criticism, by the way. I think one of the most amazing things about the Star Wars franchise is the music. And I really think Michael Giacchino did a great job encapsulating the feel of this movie, and also for not relying too much on John Williams themes, because yes, you hear the Imperial March in here in the film occasionally, and yes, you get a bit of the Force theme at times. You get some classic Star Wars music here and there in the movie, but you also get a lot of new themes, and the new themes have this fantastic quality about them where they sound new but familiar. Like, for instance, you get the Imperial Suite in the movie, which could have just been a more modern take on the Imperial March, but although it sounds sort of adjacent to the music to the Imperial March, it's not the Imperial March. It's its own piece of music, and it's a piece of music that whenever I listen to it, I think, oh yeah, it's Rogue One. It's the Empire in Rogue One. It's not quite the Empire in the original trilogy, because it wasn't till Empire Strikes Back where the Imperial March was used for the first time. People often think that it was used in A New Hope, and I'm like, no, it wasn't. A New Hope was clearly only intended to be. The Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, was clearly not intended to have any sequels, to the point that when it came out, it was only called Star Wars. And Empire Strikes Back is when you can tell that they want to make more films. Empire Strikes Back is the first movie where you can start to tell that George Lucas wants to make a franchise out of this, and that John Williams understands his vision as well, because that's when the Imperial March is used for the first time. The Imperial March was only composed in 1980 for Empire Strikes Back, which released in the same year. So you don't get much of the Imperial March in this film. You get hints at it here and there, but I love that you don't get the Imperial March in this movie, because it's not quite the same Empire we see in the original trilogy, and I think having the Imperial March may have made it seem like it was, and I like that quite a lot. I like that he composed a different piece of music for the Empire in this movie, and I think that the music for Jyn Erso, it's called Jyn Erso Suite on the soundtrack, if I remember correctly, is a beautiful piece of music, and I love what Michael Giacchino did with the musical score for this movie. I really do. I think Michael Giacchino is one of the best composers working today. His scores are constantly different and so enjoyable to listen to, and his musical score to this movie, although not as brilliant as it could have been if they hired Michael Giacchino earlier in the process, and by the way, they didn't. Originally the composer was Alexander Desplat, but he dropped out. So if they hired Michael Giacchino from the start, who knows how amazing the musical score could have been, but they didn't. And I think what we got was a very good musical score, especially considering that Michael Giacchino only had 4 weeks to compose the score. He didn't have long. And I love the musical score to this movie. I don't care what anybody says. I think it is great. Right, so this is a quick little add-on, as I forgot to talk about one of my favourite scenes in this movie when I initially recorded this podcast. And that's the whole final section of the film where you see our main characters dying. I mean, it's not the very end of the movie, but it's close to the end of the film, where the rebellion sees a Death Star in the distance for the first time, the rebel fleet in space, and the main characters, Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor on Scarif, they know they're about to die, and Cassian Andor says to Jyn, "Your father would be proud." And it's one of the most bittersweet and beautiful moments in any Star Wars movie. I mean, that musical score in the background as well. When people criticise Michael Giacchino's musical score for this film, I just want to say, listen to the track "Your Father Would Be Proud" from the score to this movie on Spotify, and how can you not be swept up by it? The musical score does such an incredible job in that whole sequence in the film. When you see the two Star Destroyers going into each other, which is one of the best visuals in any Star Wars movie, when you know that the main characters are going to die, and when the Rebel fleet see the Death Star in the distance, that whole sequence, I think, is really what makes Rogue One so damn memorable. And I can't believe I forgot to mention it when I initially recorded this podcast, but I'm mentioning it now, so it counts. Yes, I love that sequence in the film. Anyway, back to me rambling on about Rogue One. Plus, I really love... there's so much that I love about this movie. I could just go on and on talking about how much I love how the main antagonist of this film is a brilliant embodiment of where the Empire is at this point in the Star Wars timeline. He is constantly the character of Orson Krennic, who's the main antagonist of the film, is constantly angry, is constantly trying to take down the rebellion, and any time the rebellion are one step ahead of him, he gets even more furious. And I love all the scenes between Orson Krennic and Grand Moff Tarkin, like when they're just constantly arguing and constantly challenging each other. And I love how it shows the inner workings of the Empire. I love how we get to see that the Empire isn't as... what am I trying to say? It isn't as... I can't think of the word. It isn't as put together as we think it is, as they try to look like they are. And then you get Cassian Andor, who is a perfect embodiment of the rebellion at this point in the Star Wars timeline, because he is agitated. He constantly wants to take down the Empire, and he's not trustworthy of anybody. Like early on in the film, when the rebellion captured Jyn Erso for the first time, one of the rebel commanders, who played the head teacher in Sex Education, by the way, so it was kind of funny watching him in this film. But anyway, one of the rebel commanders is like, he's quick not to rely on what Jyn Erso was saying. He's quick to dismiss her. And Cassian Andor is very much like that throughout this movie. He's not trustworthy of Jyn Erso until around about the final act of this film begins. And he's agitated, he's closed off, and he doesn't let anybody in, and he's very quiet as well. And I love how he plays it, and I think that character is a perfect embodiment of... I don't even know if embodiment is the right word. It's a perfect representation of where the rebellion is at this point in the Star Wars timeline. Furthermore, I love how, as the film goes on, we see that the rebellion is also basically in complete shambles. Like when they hear about the Death Star plans, like when Jyn Erso is telling them, and you get the scene where there's all these different rebel commanders in the same room. I'm not sure the rebel commanders, but rebel leaders. There's all these different rebel leaders in the same room debating whether they're going to go to Scarif or not to help get the Death Star plans, to try and get the Death Star plans. They're not latching on to any hope. They're all just arguing about whether what she's saying is true. And I love how we get to see that the rebellion isn't all smiles and they're not all happy and everything. They're actually quite a closed off bunch of people who aren't ready to sacrifice themselves for the first bit of hope that they get. They actually are more like, we need something that we can actually rely on. And I really love how we get to see the inner workings of the Empire and the inner workings of the rebellion in this movie. And we get to see that the rebellion isn't exactly what we thought they were when you watch them in the original trilogy. In the original trilogy, you think they're the good guys and that they never do anything wrong. And then here you get to see that, actually, the rebellion do quite a bit wrong. Like, the first rebel character we meet in this movie, if I remember correctly, I'm right here. The first rebel character we meet in the movie is Cassian Andor, and we see him kill somebody in order to get some information that he needs. And it's like, wow, that's how you're introducing the rebellion in this film. He's showing that these guys, they do things wrong, but that's in order to achieve the good. I love that about this film. Moreover, I love how this film feels like these Star Wars video games we played as a kid come to life in one epic movie. Like, I've already spoken a little bit about this, but I'm going to speak more about this. I remember playing the original Star Wars Battlefront 2 growing up and thinking to myself, imagine if they made a Star Wars movie like this. And then going to watch Rogue One in the cinema and going, oh my god, that's exactly what they've done. Then playing the original Star Wars Battlefront 2, going back to play it, which I hadn't done in such a while back then, and just thinking, oh my god, they made a movie out of this game, out of these Star Wars Battlefront games. It feels like Star Wars Battlefront, the movie, in my opinion. And I love that about it. I'm not saying that as criticism. Sometimes you watch a movie and it feels like a video game and it can take you out of it. And, people say that about the Avatar films. They feel like video games. I don't agree with that, but I see where they're coming from. Whilst when I watch Rogue One, I feel like it's a video game come to life. I feel like they've done a great video game adaptation, even though it's not a video game adaptation whatsoever. I feel like I'm playing as Jyn Erso, discovering all this stuff about the Empire, trying to get her father back, and seeing all the doing all these missions, and then doing this big mission at the end where there's this battle taking place, and it feels like this. It feels like a Star Wars video game coming to life. When you get that big battle, there's also a space battle going on at the same time. And you get to see 80 ACTs, which are basically AT-ATs. It's just another version of the AT-ATs that we get to see in Empire Strikes Back. And it's like somebody played the Star Wars Battlefront games and went, I'm going to make a movie out of this. And then in the final act, it's like, in all the Star Wars Battlefront games, you have a big battle. And that's what I'm going to put at the end of this movie. I'm going to have a big battle where there's X-Wings flying, TIE fighters all going all over. There's a land battle, there's rebels on foot trying to kill all these stormtroopers, and there's AT-ATs which aren't AT-ATs but basically are at the same time, and there's all these big explosions and our main characters are trying to complete their missions to get the Death Star plans. It feels like my childhood dream has come to life of watching a Star Wars movie, because that's the thing about this film. This film puts the wars in Star Wars. I'm not saying that other movies don't. Revenge of the Sith starts with a big battle in space. The Phantom Menace has a big battle. It's not a great one, but it has a big battle. So does Attack of the Clones. So does A New Hope. So does Empire Strikes Back. And so does Return of the Jedi. And so on and so on and so on. But this movie, I feel, has one of the best battle sequences in any Star Wars movie. And it puts the wars in Star Wars to the point that I remember the first time I watched this, I went to go watch it with my dad. And I remember he was never a big Star Wars fan. He'd seen all the films. I think he thought some of them were okay, but he was never a big fan of the franchise. And I remember walking out the cinema with him, and he was saying, after watching this film, that was the first Star Wars movie I really liked, and that was because he was always a big fan of war movies. And then he said to me, because it felt like a war movie, and I was like, yeah, it did. Yeah, it really did. Like in war movies, you often have the feel like, if the good guys don't win, then, more often than not, if you're watching a World War II film, the Nazis are going to do something terrible. And the Empire was based off the Nazis. And you can really feel it in this film. You feel the terror of the Empire throughout. And I love how this film shows the rebellion as this struggling army, but also they're trying to take down this villainous force, and it feels like a war movie, and I love that about it as well. And I love all the battle sequences at the end of this film. It puts the wars in Star Wars, and I love that about this. I could go on and on and on, and I have done already. And I don't even care about Grand Moff Tarkin in this film. I don't care about the way he looks. To the point that the first time I watched this film, I actually thought that somehow they got Peter Cushing back from the dead to star in this movie, which obviously they hadn't, but I couldn't get over how much I believed in the look of Grand Moff Tarkin the first time I saw it. Same with Princess Leia, and I think both of them are important to have in this film. Princess Leia, not so much. You could have taken her out of it and it would have been the exact same film, but I think you needed Grand Moff Tarkin in there, because he's such a big part of A New Hope, that if he wasn't in this film, the way he is, then it wouldn't work. And I don't care about the de-aging CGI that they use for this film. I really don't care about all that, because I think it works, and I think their characters were needed. Plus, I love Darth Vader in this film. I love how they don't overuse him in the scenes he's in. He's great. Like, one of my favourite Vader lines of dialogue is from this film, and he says to Krennic, Director Krennic, be careful not to choke on your aspirations. I mean, I did a really bad impression of him saying the voice there, but you get the point I'm making. I love that line of dialogue in the film, and I love the way they use Vader with that scene at the end of the film, which is one of the best scenes in any Star Wars movie. And of course, I'm talking about the hallway scene. I remember watching that in the cinema. That is not a feeling I'll forget anytime soon. Literally sitting there thinking, oh, they're going to cut in a sec. Like, you see Vader come out of the darkness. I was thinking, oh, they're going to cut. And then you see him ignite lightsaber, like, they're going to cut. And then he starts to move forward. I'm like, they're not cutting. They're going to show this scene. Oh my god. That was literally my thoughts watching it for the first time. I was sitting there, and I think that was one of the reasons I was so in awe of the movie the first time I saw it, because I couldn't get over that we saw Darth Vader wreck shop in such a perfect way. I couldn't get over how terrifying and heart-pounding that hallway scene was. I mean, God, it was so brilliantly done. Sometimes I re-watch that hallway scene just to get those same feels I had the first time I saw it. I mean, talk about a way to end your movie. I mean, I think the rest of the film is superb as well. But the way they finish off, I was like, yeah, that is just the cherry on the icing on top of the cake. It really is. That Darth Vader hallway scene will go down in history as one of the best scenes in the Star Wars franchise. So yeah, there's lots I love about it. And I don't really have any big criticisms. I mean, my only criticisms are that you get this big space battle at the end of the film, and then you watch the space battle in A New Hope and it feels small compared to this movie, and you're like, wait, but this is a prequel to A New Hope. And by the way, I think this film aligns what we're trying to say. I think this film aligned with A New Hope very well. I think it aligns with A New Hope very well. But when you watch A New Hope, there's the space battle at the end of that movie. It's good, but it feels small compared to the space battle in this film. You're like, where did all those rebel ships go? Why are they not there in the space battle in A New Hope? I do think that's a little inconsistent. Plus, I love the cameo from C-3PO and R2-D2. I love how we get to them in this movie, because it wouldn't feel like a Star Wars movie without them. But their cameo makes almost no sense, because at the end of Revenge of the Sith, we see them on the ship that we see them on at the start of A New Hope. But in this movie, which is set in the days before A New Hope, or the day before A New Hope even, we see them at the we see them as the Battle of Scarif is beginning, which is, the day before A New Hope, and we see them on Yavin 4, probably the safest place in the galaxy. And yet at the start of A New Hope, we see them on the ship that they were on at the end of Revenge of the Sith. And it's not, it's not unreasonable that they couldn't have got back on the ship, but it's like, really? That doesn't really make sense. I love the cameo. I love seeing C-3PO and R2-D2 in this movie, but I don't know. I just think the cameo could have been better done. Maybe they could have been with Senator Bail Organa. And I love that we get to see him back in the movie. That's something I haven't mentioned yet. I love Jimmy Smith says Senator Bail Organa, which is something I never said in my Star Wars prequel reviews. And I love that we get to see him in this film, only for a quick cameo, but it, ties all the storylines together, in my opinion. But we see C-3PO and R2-D2 without him, and I just think, the cameo doesn't quite make sense. Still, I liked seeing him in this film. And I've got nitpicks here and there. Like, I think Chirrut, I think that's what the character's called, I think he should have had a better fate. There's one moment in the film, and again, it only lasts for like 30 seconds, so it's a nitpick, but K2SO turns to the camera and literally says to the audience, if they don't come back, me and Cassian are leaving without them. And I'm like, who are you talking to? Every time I watch that little bit of the film, I just want to shout at the screen, who are you talking to, K2SO? Because no one else is here. And again, small nitpicks here and there. But in the long run, I really don't have anything major to complain about when it comes to this film. It's just so damn enjoyable. It's so good. Like, it shouldn't be this good. It's a film about, the rebellion get the Death Star plans. We already know what they do. You know, we already watched A New Hope. A New Hope came out in 1977. We knew that they got the Death Star plans, and we knew that they blew up the Death Star. So we didn't need a film about how they got the Death Star plans. And like I said, I was going to cinema thinking, why have Disney decided to make this as their second Star Wars movie? But then I got it, because it felt like they had a story to tell. That's something that I was always talking about in Revenge of the Sith. It feels like George Lucas had a story to tell when it came to that Star Wars prequel. Not the other Star Wars prequels, but that Star Wars prequel in particular. And here, it feels like they had a story to tell. And it feels like, you know, the writers on this film and the people behind this movie went, I don't think George Lucas got the prequels right. And this is what we think the Star Wars prequels should have been. And you know what? I think they did a really, really great job. So, let's turn to the question that I've put in the title of this podcast today. Is Rogue One the best Star Wars movie since Return of the Jedi? Since the original trilogy? And my answer is yes. And I am a sequel trilogy defender. I will defend The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi to the day I die. Not so much The Rise of Skywalker, but I do still enjoy that movie. But I am a Disney Star Wars defender for the most part. I haven't loved everything they've done, but I'm a defender of what they've done with Star Wars for the most part. But I think this is the best Disney Star Wars movie. Because it was just... I mean, like I said before, it puts the wars in Star Wars. And as a big Star Wars fan, what else do you want? It's so good to watch. And you know what else? Andor is making this film better. Like, I was watching this movie thinking, oh god, there's so much great setup in Andor Season 1 for this film. And I can't wait to see what Andor Season 2, which is coming out, I think, next year, if I'm not mistaken. I can't wait to see how that's going to set up Rogue One even more. You know, I think Andor makes this film even better than it was before, which is saying a lot, because I've always thought this was a fantastic film, ever since I rewatched it for the third time. So, the fact that Andor is making it even better, I mean, there you go. I love this movie. I really adore it. I do think it's the best Star Wars since Return of the Jedi. And again, that's coming from a sequel trilogy. That's coming from a sequel trilogy defender. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Rogue One, a Star Wars story, I'm going to say that it's a... yeah. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. God, I love this film. There's not anything I would really change about it. I think it's brilliant. It's so good, you know? I'm just... every time I think about this film, I smile. And, you know, something I haven't really mentioned yet as well is how emotionally engaging this film is. The whole stuff with Jyn Erso trying to find her father. That he, you know, that is the guy who created the Death Star. Who's the guy who came up with the Death Star. Our protagonist, but, well, yeah, this is what I'm trying to say. Our protagonist's father came up with the Death Star, and I love how throughout this movie we see her trying to find her father, and then she finally reunites with her father as he dies. And I love how well it's done, and I love Mads Mikkelsen in this film, because Mads Mikkelsen is known for playing villains. Here, you think he's not going to be a nice character because he's the guy that created the Death Star. However, the filmmakers behind this movie play into that. They're like, oh, we think, you know, we think that you think he's going to be a bad guy. But actually, he's not a good guy. But actually, he is a good guy. And we're going to play around with your feelings towards Mads Mikkelsen before this movie. I'm not sure how much I'm making sense right now, because I'm sweating buckets because I'm recording this on what feels like the hottest day of the year so far, and my hay fever is really getting to me. Like, I am not feeling too well right now, but you get the point I'm making. I think Mads Mikkelsen is brilliant in the film. I think all the performances are so good. And I love the world building, which is one thing I haven't mentioned. We get to see Jeddah, And like, when I watched Jedi in this film, I'm like, give us a Disney Plus TV show now. I want to see loads of Jedi. That sounds like quite an interesting planet, and you only see it in this movie, as far as I'm aware. You might see it in an animated thing, but I don't watch Star Wars animated stuff, so I can't comment there. But I want to see more Jedi. Every time I watch it in this film, I'm like, yeah, I love how I get to see Darth Vader's castle. Something which I don't think I get to see in any other Star Wars movie, as far as I'm aware. And I'm like, brilliant. This world building I love, Scourth. And we get to see more of Yavin 4, which we don't get to see a lot of in A New Hope. Again, it's this world building that I think works so well, and I think this movie worked so well. It's so much better than it has any right to be. It's exciting to watch. It's emotionally engaging to watch. It puts the wars in Star Wars and has great characters that you care about, even so you don't really know much about them. And I mean, it's just, it is the best Star Wars movie since Return of the Jedi, in my opinion. It is, like, I love it. I think I've made that pretty clear in this podcast today. Yeah. I love this movie to pieces. And that's why, when I give my rating, I'm going to put this on. So, as I already said, and I was going to say once more in this podcast today, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, is a 10 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's podcast. That was a hand-painted helmet, by the way, that I put on. That's it for today's podcast. If you have seen Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. Maybe you love the film, or maybe it's just not for you. Whatever your thoughts are on this film, please let me know in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. I look forward to many more podcasts coming very soon on this channel. I should have my review of A New Hope coming relatively soon on this channel, whenever I feel like it. But until my next review on whatever movie it is, don't even know what I'm saying anymore. But until my next video, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.